Thank you for coming to Metro East Division Lunch. We'd like to thank our 2020 year-long sponsors. That's First National Bank of Texas, Intex Electric, and K&S Heating and Air. I'd just like to remind everybody about the golf tournament November 2nd. We've got room for about 15 teams, and we still have partnerships available. So if you're interested in playing golf, you need to get on that. So we're about to start our webinar, but first, just a reminder, we'll be taking questions for the program. Please put any question you have in the Q&A. You can find that feature at the bottom of your screen. Questions will be answered at the end of the program. Also, the panel will be recorded, make available on Dallas BA YouTube channel and Facebook. Is our speaker back yet?
I'm here.
There we go. I'd like to introduce our state representative, Keith Bell. You take it away, Keith.
All right. Well, thanks, Greg. And Misty, I appreciate the invitation to speak to our Dallas Builders Association, Metro East. And, I'm as a member and proud of Greg stepping up and working with you guys. It's, we're in this space, so I understand it as an electrical contractor. So at this time, many of you know, I was elected in 2019, served my first term now in the 86th legislative session. I'm in the throes of a campaign. That's a great part about being a state rep or your congressman is we run every 2 years. So, I personally, in about 100 days in the 86th legislative session, probably made 2,800 record votes. So, it's an opportunity to hold our feet to the fire of, how we voted and how we represented you. So, you want me, Greg, to go into the questions that you sent, or do you want to ask those? What's the format?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you can just go through them and just answer. You can do.
The questions that were posed up front, what do you see being the key policy decisions in the next session that would relate to home builders? The three biggest things that we're going to deal with is going to relate to everybody, including the construction industry and home builders. Constitutionally, we're only required to do one thing as Texas legislature, and that's adopt a budget every biennium. So for every 2 years, we create a budget. As you full well know, if you saw the latest comptroller reports from Glenn Hager, the last quarter ending in September, we're about 2.5, 2.6% behind in sales tax collections of that of 2019 for that quarter. It's projected that we'll probably be between $5 and $6 billion of a shortfall. And what you got to realize is 60% of our total revenues in the state of Texas is driven by sales tax. Then you got motor vehicle taxes and franchise tax, and which all of us pay as entrepreneurs, and we all have vehicles and own a business. You paying franchise tax, sales tax on materials. But you have a lot of money that comes in on our excise taxes, which are oil and gas. And so, though we're all enjoying $1.80 gasoline for, I got a fleet of 50 or 60 vehicles. I'm enjoying saving some money on the fuel. Where that ends up being a problem is our severance tax collection is probably down over 30% during this pandemic. So it becomes a problem for all of us. as an elected official in the state of Texas, we don't have any money other than the revenues we generate from state-owned lands from those excise taxes or our own cash investments. So everybody else, all the rest of the money comes from me and you. And so, and there's only a certain amount of pockets to pull that from. This last session, we voted to put out a HJR and a constitutional amendment that there would, you had to have a 2/3 threshold to jump of the legislature before you could call a constitutional amendment on income taxes, state income taxes. Well, that passed overwhelmingly by our electorate in the state of Texas. So, it's going to be very difficult. That's just a poison pill to ever have a state income tax in Texas. So you got sales tax, you've got property taxes against our schools. Those are being compressed with HB3 that we passed in the 86th. Those are the buckets of money, and if the expenses go up, revenues are down. The expenses got to go down, or revenues got to go up in the tax. So you'll find that that's a big issue, and that will relate to you as a home builder of how we balance the budget. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But also redistricting. When you're going through a census now, we have one every 10 years. Somewhere between April and July, we'll get the results from the U.S. Census Bureau of what the population of Texas is. The way that works on the House side, and Senate as well. But in the House, we have 150 members, predicted 30 million people in Texas. So that you divide that by 150, and that's 200,000 constituents. And so we've got to redraw all the maps for each state rep to have 200,000. About 170. Started out with about 170,000. We've grown in Kaufman County significantly. It's estimated that I'll be within my tolerance. You got to be within plus or minus 5%. So one of the big things and what's important about this election right now is the outcome and the balance of power of who's in the majority of the House will dictate how the maps get redrawn. And so that's your congressional maps, that's your House maps, and senatorial maps for the state of Texas. So certainly important for the Republicans to be managing their own future. That will set the maps and the districts for the next 10 years. And so and those will move around a lot. The urban areas are getting more dense, so they're going to end up having more representation. It's strictly based on the numbers. The rural reps, East Texas, will probably lose one, maybe two East Texas reps. Probably one in West Texas, as the populations are not growing as fast in those rural areas. There's only 150. So when they redraw the maps, just as they did in 2010, there may be several incumbents that are running against incumbents in primaries. So that process during the session, you can imagine there's significant consternation. So that's going to take the air out of the next legislative session. I think you're going to see some of the unintended consequences that may have occurred with HB3. If you listen to what's going on, taxpayer-funded lobbying, that was killed in the 86. That'll raise its head, and that'll be a divisive issue. Not necessarily, and I will tell you this: in the legislature, a lot of times it's not Republican and Democrat; it's urban versus rural, and so you'll see that be an issue on that particular issue. Those are really in my opinion, Mental health, it continues to be something that folks are talking about. We put some Senate Bill 14, I believe it was, or no, 11 and 12, or 11, I think it was 11. Senate Bill 11 last session, that was a mental health bill, did a lot in pub ed and for adults. You're going to see another push on mental health and healthcare. Healthcare continues to rise. You're on the backside or in the middle, hopefully on the backside of this pandemic. At some point, there will be an end. This too shall pass. But, you know, the cost involved in that, Medicaid costs continue to rise, women's health, and what that costs, chips, kids, you know, those are going to be issues, and those policy decisions all feed back into the budget, and more so than you've seen in a while. Anything with a fiscal note. So if I file a bill, the first thing I have to do is ask the legislative budget board to give me a fiscal note. How much does this cost? And how much it's going to cost the state of Texas? And I can tell you if you file a bill with a fiscal note, it's your responsibility to find that money, and that means somebody else is going to lose it. And so I will tell you, any piece of legislation that has any kind of fiscal note is going to be utterly almost impossible to move across the 87th legislature. Next question: how has the pandemic impacted the way I do my job as a representative? I was in the Capitol on Tuesday at about 2:30. That was the first time I'd been in that building since February the 28th. It is completely closed. It is closed to everybody except members and their staff. And so you can't meet anybody there. If you have to meet with, for instance, your lobby, whether that's Ned or JD, in builders, home builders in Austin, you got to do that at their office, or you got to do it offsite, because they don't allow any visitors in the building. So I was meeting in a building to work with my staff on some, legislative issues and some things that we're doing, budgeting and whatever, just of our own internal office process. So all meetings are outside, so there's no reason to be down there. Everybody, just like you guys, are Zooming. It's actually more efficient. I think this is interactive. As you were sitting across my desk, more people can participate. It's still transparent. And I don't have to drive 3.5 hours one way to have a meeting in Austin because somebody wants me sitting in person. So we can actually get things done faster, and it's more efficient for me. And so that's different. Zoom's different. It's different from fundraising. I appreciate the home builders for putting out a advertisement for me. I've got a skeet shoot coming up November the 27th, and I know, just like you guys had asked about the budget shortfall, that's another question. Glenn Hager's your controller, comptroller. He's going to be speaking there. He's going to give everybody an update on sales tax and the deficit and how we're going to pay for it and the options. And I felt like for my constituents and the people that would participate, they'd rather hear from him than hear from me, because he's the statewide elected. He's got the responsibility. He's making the predictions, and his information will be timely.
Representative?
Yes, sir.
Hey, Phil Crone, and thank you again for joining us and having the conversation. I was just wanting to, before we talked about the budget and some of the impacts, perhaps with sales tax and the home builder side of things, do you anticipate that scenario that you just described with the Capitol and how open it is to be what we're going to be dealing with in the session? I mean, I can't really see, just with the way things are going, how we're going to be able to visit you on rally day like we used to, but I didn't know if you had heard any plans on what we were thinking about as we get the session opened up.
Sure. Well, all of us, Charlie Guerin is the chairman of House Administration. Charlie sent out a survey to all the membership. if I remember right, it was 39 or 40 questions that we all had to fill out as far as, what it looked like for us. What were we willing to do as members? What our office was going to look like. I decide what how my office is managed. The house as a body puts the rules in place. Feel concerning how we interact or how we run on the floor. I think there's a possibility that maybe the gallery won't be open, which, on the second floor looks out above. But, it's all live streaming. So, I mean, you can be in your office and watch me on the house floor if that's what you want to do. As far as hearings, they're outfitting the hearing rooms with plexiglass dividers and shields. I think what you're going to see is the hearing rooms will be open. It'll be the same social distancing where it's every other row, every third row, every third seat. I don't see that changing that much unless something really, different occurs. I just don't see it moving this fast. So what's going to happen if you testified? There's an electronic system in the hallway where you go in and put your name, and I want to testify on this bill, and I'm for or against, or I want to testify, or I'm not testifying. We as members all have iPads. We had them last session, and so all that information and all the data comes up. So the chair is going. If you can't get a seat in the hearing room, the chair is going to call on you. And then you're going to come in there and be able to testify, and you're going to be behind. I perceive that's what that's going to look like. You can't keep the people out of the people's house and out of the people's business. Even if, now whether or not they add a level of Zoom testimony, if you open it up and everybody in the state of Texas could testify on a bill via Zoom, sitting in their living room, I don't think, Phil, we'd ever get anything accomplished because we'd have, 1,000 people testifying.
That's a quick way to burn 140 days, isn't it?
Absolutely. So, though it's transparent in the process, there are things that kind of keep that gathered up to some kind of reasonable level. So I just don't see us opening it up. Now, during the interim process, we're having some hearings on Zoom, and that's invited testimony. So Phil, you're personally invited to testify, or Misty or Greg or whomever, to testify on that piece of legislation. We get that input, and then we make a recommendation for the 87th, and then you open it up for anybody to testify. But you got to get to Austin to do it, in the past. And I can't imagine that we're going to just bust that wide open. And you're exactly correct. That's a really quick way to burn up 140 days of talking about, all these things. So,
but on the other side,
on
the other side, there needs to be that transparency there.
That's
as
right.
You mentioned correctly, it's the people's house, because
right.
We've seen it, and David and I've seen it in local government, that some have used this new virtual world as a way to kind of disappear behind the virtual screen. And, we won't show you what goes on behind the curtain. You'll just enjoy what comes out of there. And I like what I'm hearing in terms of more of a hybrid approach. Sure, we have to be safe, but we still need to have the access for people to come down there and make their voice heard on these bills, and especially the ones that relate to the industry.
And like I said, it'll be up to individual members, I believe, to decide however they want to open their office. There'll be members that won't allow any visitors, and you'll meet with a member via Zoom, or even the lobby that normally comes to our office. But I think from standard protocols, there'll be temperature checks. There'll be, you'll have to wear a mask when you enter the building and any common areas. And then each individual member will decide whether or not you're wearing one when you walk through my door, whether or not I'm going to take visitors. Once again, it's the people's house. And I mean, I take a lot of risk being a representative, and folks visiting my office when we're in session is just one that I believe I just need to take. I think it has to be transparent. I think people have a right to come in here and sit in my office and talk about it, and we can mask up and wash our hands and stay social distance. For me, I've got a conference table. If you've been to my office, I've got a conference table. So I've got 5 chairs and then my chairs at the end, because when we're working on something, whether it's a group of a lobby or constituents, or it's my team, it is a team. I mean, we're collaborating, and so I like to spread it out. That's the way I operate at Intex, and it's the way I operate my office and legislate. So for me, I'll have my constituents and those that are concerned in my office sitting across my desk, and we'll do the state's business in an open and honest and transparent manner. And once again, I think that's going to be an ideology, and it's going to be a philosophy, and it's going to be individual 150 different ways. So that I can't answer for my colleagues, but I can tell you what I will do. So.
Yeah, well, and I can appreciate that. Just like we're seeing in society, everybody's got different ways on how they're approaching it and what they feel is safe. I do want to go back to what you were talking about in terms of the budget. You just kind of alluded to it, and I know that to a certain extent it's a Glenn Hager conversation, but to a required extent, it's, as you mentioned, having to get the budget done as a legislature. We had a proposal last time from one of your Republican colleagues to levy a tax, sales tax on residential construction labor, which of course is a half or more of the construction of a new home. I'm hearing that as a big concern from the industry, that may return in the context of the budget challenges that we have. What comments do you have on that? I know we've still got an election to get through and a whole lot of other things to look at, but what would you have to say to builders who are concerned about that, and rightfully so at this point?
Well, I mean, obviously 8.25% on 50% of the cost, or 60% of the cost of a residential construction. I guess, and depending on, in some areas, it could be more set to 70 to 80%. It's increasing the cost of the home, which decreases the affordability. It goes back to a poll that I put out on my Facebook page during the 86th, and that was, do you want property tax reduction? Because we need this bucket full of money, and so these things go into it. So if you want a reduction in property taxes, then you have to have an increase in sales tax. Some people believe that's a consumption tax. In my district and House District 4, over 60% of the people would rather have a dollar per dollar tax swap, property tax, for sales tax. And that's a different issue. But, if there is a budget shortfall, they will be looking for monies. And, my concern is, and I think you saw this in the legislature this last session. I think it was y'all's 24, 33, 39, the materials bill.
Yeah, 2439.
Yeah. The argument of affordability resonated with the legislature, because I don't think there was about 4 or 5 people in the House that voted against that bill. And so, so if you make the argument that it's about affordability and ability for people to own and buy homes, once again, you got the same argument here. Yeah, maybe we need the additional income. However, where's this taking affordability when you've got this much pressure already with inflation? Not only with labor, because there's a shortage of it. We face that every day, but also with commodities. I mean, lumber is out of control. And I don't buy much of it, but I hear everybody talking about it. And so, when a sheet of OSB is 24 or 25 bucks, I mean, that's just, substantially what's it used to be, $7 or $8. So not
Yeah.
only, so, it's
And
4X. I mean, that's a problem. And eventually, it doesn't matter which part of the construction we're talking about, Phil, at the point in time that there's an equilibrium between costs continue to rise to where either the ROI doesn't exist on a commercial structure, whether it's apartment rents or office rents, warehouses, or affordability with houses where, what we're seeing, or at least I've heard, is you're seeing cost and sales prices of houses rising faster than the appraisers are willing to write an appraisal for. Well, I mean, if it doesn't appraise for what you got a contract for, and the buyer can't get a mortgage, well, I mean, you're just going to vapor lock the industry. And so, yeah, it's problematic, and I don't think that's the answer. I just, I didn't appreciate as a commercial contractor having to charge sales tax on, remodels and on, and on, service calls if they were leased or commercial or whatever. On a new construction, on a new construction project, you're already getting the sales tax on the materials. So, you're only talking about the labor. Well, new construction and commercial doesn't have sales tax on that labor either. So, if they go down this road, Phil, I can probably assure you, they're not going to just pick out the home builders. They're going to tax labor on all new construction. And I think there's plenty enough opposition out there from ABC, AGC, the home builders. I just don't see that's got legs. So I mean, it may be a red herring out here, but I just don't see how that gets legs, because the state's got a rainy day fund, and we've got the money set aside. And what that's for is for budget shortfalls. Keynesian economics, you spend during a recession, try to level out the budgets and tax rates, and then you add the tax or collect the tax as the economy comes up on the bottom end of the cycle, of the sine wave. So that's the whole purpose of that. And we finally spent some of that in the last session for Harvey related. I mean, man, has there ever been a rainier day in Texas than the floods that we saw with Harvey and Houston? And so the House, is probably a little bit more, that's more palatable in the House than it is the Senate. I mean, the pushback and the hold on and pile that up. Well, it's your money. It's the people's money. We get to decide what's rainy enough to spend the rainy day funds. And I don't know once, I mean, we hadn't had a pandemic since 1918. That's terrible. I mean, you got people out of work. Luckily the U.S. government has sent us CARES Act money so that we've redistributed, whether it's in the counties, schools, cities, offset the billions that we're spending with Texas Workforce Commission on unemployment. And so, and that's just flowed through. But what's hurt us is the lack of sales tax, the businesses that have shut down, the lack of the economy and fuel purchases, all those things. That's what's hurt us. All the money we're flowing through out to all those that have been affected, most of that money is all coming through CARES Act and from the federal government. So
and it's good that there's help there, and maybe things aren't as bad as they seem on paper, but obviously you can understand why the concerns are there. And you had touched on, and we'd gotten a question in the Q&A, so I wanted to refer back to it here on House Bill 2439. We've had obviously a big economic impact with the pandemic, and homes and where we live have been as important as ever. But there are a lot of haves and have-nots with the way the economy has worked out, and a lot of people aren't able to afford and are increasingly, for the things you pointed out, unable to do so. But at the same time, cities are also looking at the price of housing in terms of what it can deliver to their tax rolls and the revenue and their vision for the city as far as what housing looks like and who lives there. What are you hearing from municipalities? Have you heard anything about their concerns with 2439, or are there other issues that they're coming to you about in addition to that one?
Yeah, it's interesting you brought that up. I had that conversation with JD Held yesterday. I can tell you that, and I supported it. I understand it. Um, here's what happened to us as representatives, and spoke as certainly rural representatives. The more rural the representative is, the closer he is to the elected officials in his community. You can't win, I can't win House District 4 race without the support of my local electeds, whether that's school board members, council members, mayors, the commissioners at the commissioner courts, the sheriff, the DA, all that. I mean, they all got to get elected, and so they've got their own set of supporters, and so that it takes that to have these roles. I talked to Dade, Chairman Phelan, in the fall of 19, because in the smaller communities of which I represent, from Forney all the way to Chandler, here's what you got to look at, and you got to look at it holistically. Senate Bill 2 told the cities and counties you were capped at a 3.5% increase in property taxes outside of new growth. So they get the new growth for this year. And then as far as appreciation, if the appraisals went up 10%, they had to compress their tax rate so there's no more than 3.5. So you took the local, they look at it through the lens, you took away local control of property taxes. They can't do what they need to do to put in streets, parks, whatever, police, whatever folks want, because inflation's 2.5. And so, we're growing, so we need more money. And so whatever, they're local elected, same way with the county. And then, and then, I was a proponent of this. I actually created a bracket, because when they created and stopped forced annexation, they did it based upon the size of the county. And so in Kaufman County, you could still have forced annexation. You had Mesquite come into Kaufman County, into the Forney ISD. They forcibly annexed people that had always lived in Forney, and they lost their minds. And in my district, my predecessor, Lance Gooden, when that was going through, he got an exemption from Henderson County because they had a freshwater fish hatchery. So, there's all kinds of things, brackets or whatever. So when I went to Austin, I said, look, I built a bracket for 4 different counties. I worked with Justin Holland, Cecil Bell Jr., Ernest Bells, and built a bracket that would stop forced annexation from Kaufman, Rockwall, Liberty, and Waller counties. Well, Phil King had filed a bill that would stop all that. And so anyway, his bill, both of ours were tracking. I got mine across the House into the Senate. Mine was just belt and suspenders bill in case they found some kind of point of order or Phil's broad bill that just said no more forced annexation. So that passed. And so now a city can't grow their kingdom because you had to have voluntary annexation. And so then 2439 came along and said, you can't tell anybody what kind of home they can build as long as it meets a consensus code, been around at least 3 cycles, then, they can build anything they want. And next door to whatever else, there is something else. And so they looked at it through the lens of, as a representative, I sat here and took all this local control away from them. And so I got a more pushback from that particular bill. And I'll tell you why. The local mayors in these older towns, when they were created, yeah, they have a historical couple of streets with the big, nice homes. And then in the other areas of the community, those older houses built in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, I mean, they're framed, they're falling down. So they demo those, and people were building, you know, a home like you'd see in Frisco or Plano, or, you know, that's, you know, 80, 90% masonry or 100% masonry and hip roofs and nice yards and all that. And the neighborhoods were transitioning. Well, now you've got somebody goes and buys 3 of those old houses, and it'd be nice if they were craftsman style from an architectural standpoint, but folks are not building some of that. And so, you know, and so they've got an issue. And so I called to Dade about that, Chairman Phelan on, I guess, Tuesday, and talked to JD on Wednesday, you know, and what I'm going to ask them to do is come to my district and have that conversation, because man, they're not happy. And so, and here's what I'll tell you, what can actually happen and what really spun it up last week. Are you, Phil, are you aware of the Attorney General's opinion last week?
Which one?
Concerning that bill, 2439?
No, actually, I haven't heard of that one.
All right. Well, what happened last week was Marble Falls, the city of Marble Falls, had asked the Attorney General to opine on the question of can we hold back the issuance of a building permit until the applicant has proved they've met all the HOA requirements, which HOAs were exempted from 2439 and said, hey, you know, HOA says you got to have a brick chimney and this and that and bury this and all.
Right.
That's what you got to do. It supersedes 2439. So that the Marble Falls asked, can we put an ordinance in place to require a builder, homeowner, whatever, to meet all the HOA requirements and withhold issuance of a building permit until that occurs? And the Attorney General opined no. And so, you know, that, you know, the Texas Municipal League puts that all out to their, you know, city managers, and then my phone's light up. So I've asked JD to come into my district. I'll get them all together and tee that up, because as a representative, I represent everybody, and I've got to get reelected, and so I'll create the venue for them to talk about it. But here's the problem. The way that bill's now been interpreted, and this happens with any piece of legislation, what's the unintended consequence? Well, I can tell you what the unintended consequence is today. If you're in a residential subdivision in a city of where there's a lot left over, and you built this home with stone and brick, and this home over here that's Tuscany, and it's all tile roof, and it's stucco, somebody can go right between that and build a barndominium, because all the products that you build a barndominium with are approved by consensus codes. And so, you know, now does that make any sense for somebody to buy that lot and build a barndominium in the middle of that neighborhood? No, but you know, it's the ability exists. And so that's,
I've heard,
that's a concern. And so I see that to be, I think the builders are going to get some pushback, because this thing has gotten, especially and if you don't know that, I hate to be the bearer of this, you know, but yes, that thing has taken a life of its own. It's gotten pretty broad. There's some unintended consequences, and I know that I've made sure and given the chairman Phelan and who was the bill author, carried the mail, and I voted for it. I understand the need, and but there are a lot of rural legislators that are getting some pushback, and so I appreciate Ned and JD for helping me to come into my district and try to comfort some of these folks, and I appreciate Chairman Phelan. I mean, we had a great conversation about it on Tuesday, and I think they've got a handle on it in Austin, and we just got to figure out how to minimize and mitigate the blowback.
And I'll be in on that conversation too, because obviously with SB3, new development is exempted and can be in addition to, and obviously the more homes that you build, the more you can grow your tax base. I agree that both you'd alluded to historic districts, which cities can designate as such.
Right.
For the 1930s example that you used, that's a factor. Also, the other aspect to this is that HOAs and the covenants that are in there are still binding contractually if they aren't statutorily. So reading that AG's opinion, I think I would expect him to parse the difference between what is contractual and what is statutory. And that doesn't mean carte blanche that you're going to be popping up barn dominiums between some of these homes in master plan communities. But I've heard the same horror stories with, we're going to have corrugated metal homes and, all these sorts of terrible things that haven't popped up in the last couple of years. But, one thing that was popping up with a lot of cities and number in Ellis County had a big problem with this, is that they would sit and tell us straight face across the table that we're going to have to go with a masonry ordinance, or we're going to have to go with the mandate of this product that we enjoy, or we had a lobbyist from that company visit with us because we want to make homes more expensive because we don't like who's moving to the community and it's changing the dynamics of our school. And it was really getting into some things that we should have been past many decades ago in this state, and we've got a bad history of it. And it happens because a lot of times what the house looks like, it's more concerning with some of these council leaders on who's in the home as opposed to what's on the home. And unfortunately, I've been a part of those conversations, and they're painful to hear that people still think that way. And that's where this bill came about. And I think that's where, on the residential side, obviously it cuts into commercial too, but I think that's the special place that residential has, because there's local control and there's local out of control, and the best local control that I can think of is looking at the four corners of my property and what I'm able to do with the home that I live in. And to me, that's what Texas means, that we're going to care more about that than what any level of government has to say. We're not going to do anything unsafe, and we're not going to do anything outside the code, but we're going to be the best that we can be, and be that for everybody, and not just those that maybe your neighbors prefer to live next door.
Right. I would agree. I mean, there's in the other side of that coin, a lot of those ordinances that you got, whether it was masonry or whatever, were canned documents coming out of a consultant, that are sent over to the municipality, adopted, and nobody knows why. That's just kind of been the norm. And so, I would agree.
They know, they know, because if you want to sell, and you're in the business, this, that, if you want to sell a product, and a lot of it, you can get really good marketing, you can get really good engineers, or you can get really good lobbyists. And they've figured that the lobbyists are the cheapest way to get everybody to buy something when the market or the innovation isn't quite there to support it. And we're, looking at an energy code that's got or had proposed for electric vehicle charging stations and all sorts of stuff along those lines that now we're going to have to contend with here.
Well, and we fight that as electrical contractors. Who drives the code is the manufacturers. And so, they drive the code to drive their products. And so we fight the exact same problem from a more micro than macro situation, specifically with the code. So yeah, it's you got to strike a balance there to make sure that you're not picking winners and losers with products, whether it's plumbing, whether it's pipe or material, individual materials, or and no doubt about it. And I think that was the premise and what everybody wanted to try to achieve, and that's gotten done, and to make sure there is affordability, because it goes back to what I said before. Same way with an apartment. If you can't construct it, whether it's means and methods or it's the taxation, whether it's on the materials or labor or whatever, if there's not an ROI that of which a person can say, okay, I'm going to invest in this product, in this complex as an investor, and then find a contractor that will build it, that after you maintain the debt service depreciation, insurance, maintenance, and based on the rents of that area, you can't make a reasonable ROI. Phil, you're not going to invest. And without investment, we don't have growth. You don't have growth in your tax base. You don't, capitalism doesn't work unless the GDP is continuing to increase. And so, yeah, it's always, we have to find a balance, and that's what makes this job hard, is you got to take all these different pieces and then try to come up with something that's going to get that accomplished while you're trying to manage and mitigate, all the factors and opposing factors, like you say, whether it's, wherever direction they're coming from, man, there's always a handful. It's an entertaining job for $600 a month, I can assure you.
I bet. And I see Jerry Carter's hand up, and I'm gonna get him to ask you a question. I read while you're talking about this, the Attorney General's opinion, and that's what I was presuming they would do, is precisely what they've done. In part, it says, accordingly, Subchapter F does not apply to the city, and the city cannot file suit to enforce restrictive covenants under private property. So, they've got a contract that's between the builder and developer. They're in privity there. The city is not a third-party beneficiary of it, so the city can't enforce a contract that it's not a part of. Right. That doesn't mean that you're going to build outside of that contract. It just separates the contract from the statute. But so that makes sense to me. But with this, I'm going to give Jerry the opportunity to come in and ask a question. And Dave Hambley, I haven't forgotten about you. I'll have your question up next, and I'll pose it to the representative. So Jerry, you, sir, should be good to talk.
Okay. Am I up, Phil?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Representative Bell, for being with us today. You've been, you've given us a lot of information real quickly, but just something here that's for my benefit, but I think that'd also be good benefit of everyone here. And this is going to go back to the budget and the shortfalls for just a second. Okay.
Yes,
do you happen to remember how much we got in the CARES Fund, CARES Act from the federal government?
It's billions. I don't know the exact number.
Don't know the exact, but it's several billion, 3 to 5 billion, maybe. Yes, some numbers I've heard. Okay. And then we also, in the rainy day fund, what is the balance of the rainy day fund at this point in time?
I think it's somewhere between 8 and projected to be 8 to 9 billion. Once again, that grows based upon state-owned lands and the severance taxes, and so they're down. So, but that's an estimate as well. It's somewhere.
Okay, and then the third part of this is, what do you think would be the demeanor of the legislature in taking funds from the rainy day fund? 2 billion, 3 billion. Would those be fair numbers? I believe they've taken that or more at times when needed in the past.
Yes, sir. We spent several billion, between 4 and 5, if I remember right, on Hurricane Harvey, between flood mitigation, repairs, and then, you know, the projected, I think I talked about this earlier in this, but the projected shortfalls is somewhere between $5 and $6 billion. So certainly, once again, I mean, we have to decide as a legislature when it's rainy enough to use rainy day funds. Harvey was determined to be that. You know, this pandemic, I think when you see the closures, the amount of unemployment, the quantity of bankruptcies that you're going to see in this process, it's significant. And you know, I think it's a rainy day, and I certainly would be supportive of using the rainy day fund as it was created, as in Keynesian economics. I mean, you spend during the deficit, and then you work through that, and as the business cycle goes to the other side. And that's what the rainy day fund was for, is we accumulate that money during the upswing of the business cycle, and we try to level this out so that, you know, we're not raising tax rates, because you and I know very well, Jerry, if you ever raise tax rates, have you ever known them to go down? I mean, right now with HB3, we're compressing we fixed school finance, and as your values rise, we're compressing the tax rate for the M&O portion of a school district proportionately up to a 2.5% cap. That's as much as their revenues can rise. So if your appraisal went up 12.5%, the average across that school district, their tax rates coming down 10%. So yes, I think that's more than plausible that the legislature, the House, as I said earlier, is probably more amenable to doing that. They proved that to be the case in the 86th. Getting that across the finish line of the Senate, they seem to be a lot more conservative fiscally, maybe in these situations, and so that'll be the sell, I think, if we're using the rainy day funds to balance this budget.
All right, last thing, just real quickly this time, with all of this is this $5 to $6 billion shortfall is based on the estimate out of the 2019 legislature. So basically, what we're looking at, and one of the reason I'm saying this is because we don't have the crisis that many other states will have, in that the legislature has been in it somewhere down the road in its brilliance to save money when they have a chance. And so basically the funds are there to cover the shortfall. Even more funds could be available than needed without having to raise anything.
Yes, that's a true statement. Yes, sir, Mr. Carter.
That's the piece I wanted us to get to, because you start talking about the $5 to $6 billion shortfall. Most people say, where's this going to come from? Well, guys, we really have the ability to cover it. So thank you, sir. Appreciate the answer.
Well, and Mr. Carter, you know, it's your money. It's our money. They've taxed us. They've collected it, and we've piled it up. And then we decide as a body corporate of whether or not we're going to spend or not. One of the things that both the speaker and the lieutenant governor did, you know, early months ago, went back to all the agencies and said, look, you guys got to come up, you know, you got to cut your costs by 5%. So, you know, 5% is a significant amount of money. And so, unfortunately, sometimes that gets political, and you saw some of that with, you know, Misty, this would be a big deal to her. I mean, they cut some women's health stuff, and I mean, and it wasn't going to put those programs out, but I mean, politically, it's just difficult to do that. So they're all sitting here trying to pick the pieces. Everybody's got, you know, it whatever's important to you, that's what you're going to see, be watching, or whatever. So it is a process. They did that early. I will commend the comptroller. Glenn Hager's a great guy. I think you'll watch him. I think he's got a long career in state of Texas politics, but he was the first person to do this. I went back to college, got a degree in economics. he's the first one that called this a recession, and that we were going to be in. And he started making plans to try to do something with it. Now, the other thing we did in the 86 that's helping this be less of a problem is the Wayfair decision. We went back and said that, we were going to adopt the Wayfair decision, and we were going to tax B2B and B2C internet sales. And so, though we've had a reduction significantly, we've seen those through this pandemic, the online sales and the B2B, B2C revenues increase at a rate of which, we've collected a significant amount of taxes since the 86, which has offset some of this. So, there's, I think that's going to be it's a philosophical discussion, Mr. Carter. We're just going to have to get engaged in, and the sausage making won't be pretty, but we'll get on the other side.
Representative, just in the last 3 minutes that we have here, and appreciate the thoughtful answers. Last two questions, one from Dave Hambley, and I'll just ask these both at once. He kind of wants to know you talked about the pandemic related things, but how has it changed looking at your first go round as compared to your second go round, maybe asked a different way? What do you know now that you wish you knew back then? And also unrelated to that, someone else wants to know if that's a Houston Livestock Show award up there on your cabinet. So those are the last two questions that we have for you.
Well, I'll start with the last one. Yeah, I've actually got two. I used to be in the registered Angus business for about 16 years, and man, we had we were very successful in that project and process, and I got out of the registered cattle business at the top almost. The top was in 16. I got out in 15, and I just have commercial cattle. So it was fun. I had kids doing it, and they're grown. And so it was, if you want to make $1 million in the cattle business, you got to start out with two. So I got out of the registered business. But anyway, so thanks for asking that question. What I know now that I didn't know then, one of the biggest challenges that we had, and that I just had, you just can't even hardly get your head wrapped around it. I'm raising money today, not because I got a libertarian and I've got a 78% Republican Orvis and I'm going to win the general election. I'll spend probably $50,000 on salaries out of campaign funds in the session. And so, I was told, after I raised money and finally got through and won this seat, I was told, look, you got to about December the 12th, 30 days before you get sworn in, or we go into session. That's the end date. We can raise money. So you got to about December 12th to raise this money, and you're going to need about this much to get through the session. The other thing is, I knew it was $600 a month, and I knew we got a stipend as far as per diem on a daily basis. With the tax law changes, per diems are now taxable. So now I pay 37% on how much I get per day. And so I was surprised at the deficit between what it cost me to live in Austin and what I'd end up after tax getting reimbursed. So that was a surprise. But I think that what I didn't know, I wished I'd known, is maybe some of those issues. The other thing is, I spent a lot of money to try to get elected, and what the perception is out there is once you get that done, that the lobby's all going to show up, and whatever debt you got, if you make a hand and you do a good job and you pay, you're a reasonable legislator that listens to all sides. And you're consistent. I mean, the way the lobby works is you got to have 76 votes to get something across the House floor. When they come and ask me about a specific situation, they just want you to tell them the truth. If I can't support it because my district won't support it, You just got to be big enough to say, you know, Phil, I can't go there because of this, this, and this. And that it's not personal. They'd go to the next office because they're just trying to get to 76. But, you know, there's not that much money in all this process. You guys know what you donate with in your packs. And so the fallacy that, you know, we're all making this big living and being legislators is not the fact. I can tell you that. I'll be glad to show you my campaign account. So,
Well, I know that's,
so that's the process. So that's it. And then two, the last one I'll leave with you, Dave, is, you know, everybody talks about Republicans and Democrats, and you see all this on CNN and Fox and all that. The real fight in Austin is urban versus rural. Whether that's public education, whether that's health and human services, you know, those are issues that are just different between urban and rural. Just like this particular issue we've been talking about, 2439. You know, most bigger cities are, you know, they do PDs and they have a big development, 800,000 acres, 3,000 houses, and they negotiate all that stuff in the PD, and then they put in the development. In a small community like a Brownsboro or a Maybank or a Chandler, a Eustis, as those towns grow, you know, and Phil's right. I mean, they're trying to kind of control what that looks like, and you know, I don't know that much about demographics, whether or not that's the case. You hope it's not. Hope's not a plan, but yeah. But you know, it's a process, and we got to get through that, and it's hard for us as rural legislators sometimes because we're really close to, you know, for instance, you take a densely populated state rep may only have one commissioner, one school district, one city. I've got 16 school districts, 32 cities, which means I've got 32 mayors, 180. I got 180 councilmen, 96 school board members, 16 superintendents, 16 board presidents,
wow.
10 commissioners. So 2 county judges, 2 DAs, and 2 sheriffs, and they may be on opposite sides on an issue. So it's a process, but I'll tell you what I do. I appreciate it. It's an honor to serve the state of Texas. It's an honor to be in this position. I enjoy it. It's a lot of work, and I certainly appreciate y'all's support. Your support not only of me personally, but of Intex and your members that support us. I'm proud of Greg for donating his time, and I'm glad to let him set that aside to work and work for you guys and volunteers. So anything else, Phil, that you can think of you'd like to know from me? Pin a tell on the politician this morning or afternoon.
Well, we just want to close and say that I appreciate your leadership. I appreciate your candor. You've done an outstanding job for your district, for our industry, and for your hour of time today, just being able to honestly and accurately depict everything that occurs in the life of a state legislator. You definitely put in a lot more time than the salary demands there, but thank you for your time today, sir. And we look forward to many more conversations like this leading up to the session and then in the middle of it. So thank you very much.
Sure. Well, Phil, I'm glad to do it and call anytime. And thanks again for y'all's support of me professionally and as a legislator. Misty, thank you what you do. Greg, appreciate you, and look forward to talking to you guys again. Y'all stay safe, go vote. Boy, we got it is huge. I don't know that in my lifetime it's been a bigger an election just from an ideology standpoint. And then two, you know, we need to keep Texas red. We've got to be in control of creating our own destiny as entrepreneurs and Republicans, and through the redistricting process. And if you lose Texas, you don't win the presidency. I mean, you can't get there with electoral votes. So get out, vote, keep Texas red. God bless House District 4, and God bless Texas. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir. And thank you all for being here today.